Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources to hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid, and here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
Good to have you back again. Another week on Community and Technology. There's a lot going on. One of the big issues in my mind is the opening of schools, both public schools and colleges, post Labor Day. And, it's a huge issue, clearly, because of the pandemic and COVID-19. And we're here in New York City, which is, from what I've been able to gather, it may be the only big city in the country that's opening with any semblance of in-person education. As you know, the statewide rate is below 1% infection. And I just saw a stat that said in the city, the rate is 0.6% infection rate, which is really a great number. So,
No, it's not. It's really not awful.
Here would be a lot better.
A lot better than we had.
Yeah.
But it's still hundreds every week. I think hundreds every day, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and a district that has 1.1 million kids. 1%, what's that? 10,000. So,
well, actually, it's not 1% that are positive. It's 1% of those who are getting tested, who presumably are ones who are worried, usually because they have symptoms or exposure.
mm-hmm.
So it would be much less. For example, we actually have a large sample, thousands, I think it was 13,000, here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Columbia University is not doing live undergrad classes. Graduate students are here. Many of the undergraduates are here living in Columbia apartments, even if they're not going to live classes. They tested everyone, and the result of this testing everyone was 0.05%.
Now, when you say everyone, Dave, you talking about the entire undergraduate student body, or?
The entire undergraduate and graduate body, or something like that, and staff and faculty. So it couldn't have been everybody,
mm-hmm.
because Columbia is bigger than that. But it was a huge sample, and it wasn't self-selected of people who had a reason to worry.
Okay.
On the other hand, when I went up to Washington Heights the other day, there were a lot of people getting on the subway who weren't wearing masks.
Really?
That's
wow.
frightening. Yeah. And that's common in a lot of neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I just anecdotally, I was in Harlem just the other day, and although I would say most people had on masks, there probably 20% of folks walking around did not. And that's a big number, given, what we just went through over the last 3 or 4 or 5 months and how bad it was for folks to kind of drop their guard like they have. That's kind of how I'm interpreting it. Everyone hears that, New York is doing so well, infection rate below 1%. Things are opening back up, starting to, I can relax a little bit. And
people are still dying. People are still dying in
yes.
New York.
Yes.
Fortunately, or fewer.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's get back to schools, because that's what you talk about. I don't have much data on that.
Yeah, New York City school system is opening up. They delayed it 2 weeks past Labor Day. Apparently, intense round-the-clock negotiation between the mayor and the teachers' union about the terms under which they would open. The teachers' union basically did not want to open, and the mayor was pushing to open the schools. And a couple of stats that came to mind that kind of highlighted some of the reasons why the mayor, de Blasio, claims he's pushing so hard. this reading from the story in New York Times. Out of the 1.1 million school students here in New York City, public school, 750,000 are poor, quote unquote, with roughly 200,000 with disabilities and 114,000 homeless. Those are staggering numbers.
Oh, God, that last number is really frightening.
Yeah, 10% of the population, the school population, is homeless. Wow. And another nearly 20%.
Well, it must be that
are
New York is a
disabled.
very poor city, that we can't afford to provide a home for everybody. I hadn't realized New York was that poor. It looks pretty affluent when I go downtown.
Yeah. But, you know, the haves and the have-nots, and there's quite a chasm in between. So, you know, again, the mayor's push was that these kids need personalized, in-person attention. That was one of the things that he's talking about, as opposed to the remote learning platform. You know, I'm not really sure exactly how true that is, but I certainly can't argue that in-person is less effective than remote learning. You know, so, you know, I guess I got to give some kudos to the mayor for kind of insisting and pushing and hardlining his position on that. You know, I just really have my fingers crossed, Dave, as to what the outcome is going to be. I'm really hoping that it's going to work. They're still talking about a hybrid model, 2 to 3 days max in the classroom, the rest remote. And the other side of that equation that concerns me is the number of kids that don't have a device and an internet connection at home. I know the city has pushed real hard to work with some of their partners to bridge that divide. T-Mobile claims that they have distributed 350,000 internet-connected devices in New York City to New York City students, iPads that are connected. So that's about a third of the student body.
Which is a heck of a lot. And T-Mobile is doing it quite cheaply, a fifth of what they usually charge in some cases and free in others, which is a really important concession. They're talking about being willing to connect 10 million kids around the country. And they can do it. I know the network they're building.
Now, one of the schemes that I read, it sounds like some of the pricing plans where they have discounted pricing, $12 or $15 a month. It looks like they are charging those fees to the school district and making the service available free to the kids. Is that your understanding of how it works?
I don't have the details, but this is something we talked about when we had the state senator on.
Yes.
It costs T-Mobile or Verizon or Comcast something on the order of about, well, somewhere between $3 and $7 a month to connect people. That they charge us $50 a month is, well, criminal, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
But that means if they're bringing in people who wouldn't otherwise be connected at $10 and $15 a month, they don't lose anything.
Right.
And that is my expertise. I can give you some back and forth data points about the schools. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, first, two very serious cons. The first is that the evidence is becoming stronger and stronger that many of the people who show no symptoms right now are showing up with observable findings in their hearts. One I saw said 1/4 of the asymptomatic people, when examined closely, I forget what high-tech thing they did, had a noticeable heart problem.
Wow. What percentage was that? 1/4?
In one small look, and I don't know that it's representative.
Okay.
But there's a lot of consequences post-COVID that are appearing in the literature. The second thing is that some of the universities that reopened have had disastrous results, including one, I think, at the University of Alabama, where they had 1,200 cases after being open for a week.
Wow.
1,200.
That's a lot.
Okay, now, reasons why it might be the right decision. The first thing is that it clearly is hurting kids to lose 6 months of school, the way we have it with the online. There have been some tests of kids that say they've fallen 3 months behind because the schools couldn't take care of them properly. I don't know if that's a solid number, but there certainly is an impact. There's a terrible impact on the families who have to figure out how to take care of an 8-year-old kid when they've got to go to work. And we're talking about a lot of families who can't afford to take off work.
Right.
Okay. The people making these decisions, yeah, they can stay home. And many of us can work from home, as I have. But many, many people can't work from home and can't afford to miss work.
Right.
The third data point, which is very welcome, is that the results of sending kids back to school across Europe, which has happened in other countries, was actually not that bad most of the time. They found a few clusters, including in Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, but relatively few. There haven't been that much cases. Remember, the case rate in a lot of Europe is much lower than in the United States. Not that much lower in England. England's getting really bad, and the case rates have been going up in countries like Portugal and Italy. They're definitely hitting a second wave. Because, well, among other things, people aren't being careful. And so, is it right for kids to go back to school? I'm not the expert, but there are a lot of factors on both sides. It is a very high price to pay to keep every kid out of school for 8 months, 10 months. Is it worth it? Well, we're going to find out the hard way.
Yeah, unfortunately we are. Okay, this is a WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. You're listening to Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on community and technology. And we're talking about the reopening of schools, both public K through 12 as well as colleges, post Labor Day in the midst of this COVID pandemic. And one of the other things that we don't yet know, Dave, and may not know for another week or two, is whether or not there was a surge in cases in the context of Labor Day get-togethers and celebrations and parties, etc.
Guaranteed we're going to see that.
Yeah.
You saw what happened on the motorcycle rally in Dakota, right?
Give me that. My wife gave me a number that just sounded astounding. I'm not going to repeat it. What did you hear?
Well, one calculation that may be high is that this huge motorcycle rally, 50,000 people who went to Dakota and then went back home, was responsible for a third of the COVID cases in the last few weeks, over 200,000.
That's the same number that I heard from my wife. Wow, 200,000.
Now,
as a result of one event.
Epidemiology is not exact, and we don't have enough data to say for sure that it was over 200,000, but it was a heck of a lot. So I'm sure that a lot of people getting together on Labor Day are going to result in a surge of cases. I'm not an expert, but I believe I know enough to say I'm sure about that. And there's nothing new I can add. There's every reason to be careful, and it's a good thing that WHCR has gone out of its way to provide information. Stu, you've been working on that. Why don't you take a minute and tell us what HCR has been saying about what people should do.
Okay, well, you know, WHCR is a community-focused, community-minded station. So we are constantly putting out information to help our folks stay safe. So there are public service announcements running continuously. We also have a website that our first responder, if you will, our public safety folks at the WHCREBT.org. That's our emergency broadcast team here at WHCR. And if you go to that site, again, it's WHCREBT.org. There's just a whole panoply of resources related to COVID and coping and helping resources and food resources, and educational resources, and healthcare resources. WHCR also helps co-produce a number of programs in addition to community and technology, that number of other shows, including the Wisdom Table, which you can view and hear on the website safeandsmart.org. That's SAFENSMART.org. And when you go there, look for the Wisdom Table, which has interviews with doctors and specialists around COVID prevention, around alternative treatments, and just a whole wealth of information, a lot of which you don't hear in the mainstream media. One of the things that we try and focus on here at the WHCR is really providing targeted information that is not necessarily the routine stuff that you're going to hear on major media, which has to really kowtow to the commercial interests because they're advertising supported. Our station here is community supported, and we have no commercial sponsors that we are beholden to. So therefore, we can sometimes speak the unvarnished truth and lay out some things that you're not going to hear in mainstream media. So I definitely encourage folks to stay tuned to WHCR 90.3 FM, as well as our website where we stream programming at WHCR.org, our emergency broadcast team outlet at WHCREBT.org, and our other programming, companion sister programming at safeandsmart.org. So we're doing our best here to keep pushing out information, news, and resources to help the Harlem community and beyond stay informed and safe. So that's kind of our mission, and we're doing our part here at WHCR. We're still broadcasting remotely. The university is still, as are many other schools, shut down. I'm not sure what the reopening plan is yet for the fall day. We may be back in the studio sometime this fall. We don't yet know that. But in the meantime, we are continuing to produce, as we are here, on virtual platforms and streaming live on the internet, as well as rebroadcasting over the FM signal. So WHCR 90.3 FM is the place to go to for up-to-date, targeted information about your community.
Stu, why don't you give some particulars of what people should take care of? Talk to us, tell us what we should know about masks, hand washing, and so on.
Well, you know, I don't have any new information, but it's stuff that folks have probably already heard, but certainly worth repeating. Probably the biggest thing is wearing masks whenever you're in public. You know, whenever I walk out of my door, I put a mask on. You know, there's still not definitive scientific data as to how far the airborne virus can travel, but it has been scientifically shown that the virus is airborne. When you open your mouth and speak, it goes through the air, which is one of the reasons that we have the 6-foot social distancing requirement where you're at least 6 feet away from other folks. But there's no definitive science that shows, oh, it'll only travel 6 feet. We don't know. Maybe it may travel further, it may stay in the air longer. So the mask is the best defense against that, both for protecting yourself from catching as well as protecting others from possibly catching something that you may unwittingly be carrying.
We actually have a lot of evidence on that. They found ways to see whether there are particles in how you breathe and so on. Most
Okay,
of them
do you have any information on how far the particles can travel?
That's where I'm going.
Okay.
Most of the time, 3 or 4 feet is enough,
Mm-hmm.
but not always. And I've seen pictures in the press showing how they're, I don't know what kind of ultraviolet camera or whatever they're using to make these things visible, go well beyond 6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's the exception. But you should think of some of the particulars on when those exceptions happen. When you're singing, you're putting a lot of air out of your lungs.
Right.
That's probably true, although I don't have any data on when you're exercising, even riding bicycles.
In a gym, for instance.
Yeah. Why don't you tell people, and the other thing, of course, is that the time really matters. If you go past somebody for 5 seconds, that's one thing. If you stay with them for 15 minutes, that's a far greater exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So Jenny is now making a rule. Jenny was just in Denver. Her friend died, and her father was 96.
Mm-hmm.
Her friend died, and a lot of their mutual friends came together, and she saw some of them. She's sensible. She's careful. She does 6 feet and all of that. But one of the rules she's adding is that she doesn't spend a long time with each person. That when she sees a friend, she might spend 15 minutes instead of 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Is that important? No proof one way or the other, but it makes sense to me. Stu, why don't you tell us what we know about hand washing?
Well, we know that the virus does live on surfaces for some time. Some surfaces it can live for a day or 2 or 3, depending on the surface. So, when you go out and you touch things, door handles, doorknobs, doors, any other surfaces that have a lot of touching by other folks, you're very vulnerable to possibly picking up the virus. So washing the hands when you come back inside, if you're going out, washing every time you come back in. I wash, 4, 5, 6 times a day, depending on how I'm moving around. The other thing related to the hands is gloves. I often wear the disposable plastic gloves. And that helps in terms of, when you're out and you're touching things, you're driving your car, you get out, you close the door, you open doors, you may be greeting people, and you think you're not touching anything, but it's surprising how many surfaces you touch as you move around. Your car keys, you lay them down, you pick them up. Your book or your book bag, you lay it down, you pick it up. So you don't know what you may be picking up as you move around and touching with your hands. So it's important, even if you wear the gloves, to wash very consistently. And warm water and soap for at least 2 minutes is a routine. One of the kind of tricks folks say, sing happy birthday twice while you're washing your hands. And that's about the right amount of time to make sure that the virus is not so much killed, but it's washed away by the soap. So that's really important. And of course, touching your face and touching other parts of your body with your hands it's important that the hands be clean at all times. So, you know, even when I'm home and I might be moving around the house, we're not totally sure. Although my household, most of them have been tested, and we think we're all okay. You know, I don't think you can overwash your hands. So, you know, wash those hands. You go outside, wear the mask, social distancing, and I certainly understand Jenny's thing about not interacting with anyone too long, keeping it short and keep moving. And as you're saying about the particles living in the air, moving in the air, when you're around folks as opposed to moving past folks, you're potentially more vulnerable. So
I was really
even walking down the street, you know, I try to keep my distance from folks that may be congregating because you don't know what's coming out from that group.
Sorry I interrupted. I thought you hit an end. I was really surprised when I learned why it's at least 20 seconds for washing your hands. The dentists always say you should spend 2 minutes brushing your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that is because that makes sure you do a careful job. I assume that was the same with hand washing, but there's another aspect to it.
Okay.
Soap and detergents actually dissolve the coat on the virus. Each virus particle has an envelope or an outside coat.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's called coronavirus because it's round. It's fatty. And soap dissolves fat. So you want to have the soap or detergent on long enough to dissolve any virus particles that might be on your hands. I hadn't realized that originally. Time for a station break?
Yes, it is. We're here on WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem, broadcasting and streaming from City College. You're listening to Community and Technology with Dave and Stu. And we've been talking during the last segment about the virus and safety measures and all the really positive things that WHCR is doing in terms of getting information out over the airwaves and online about safety and being informed and keeping your family safe and finding the resources that you need in this current pandemic. And I'm wondering, David, if you want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about technology and the election that's coming up in less than 60 days. You know, I saw a piece that really got my attention that talked about, the headline was Chaos Scenarios Drive Gatekeepers Election Prep. And the story was about Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Reddit holding meetings with federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies running through various scenarios, disaster scenarios, if you will, around the election. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but that was a big wow for me. Did you have a chance to look at that story? And I wonder what your reaction is to that.
Well, voting by mail isn't perfect, but there's definitely reason to believe that the people in places like Wisconsin who went to the polls, even though they wore masks, even though they tried to distance, some of them got infected.
Mm-hmm.
So this is important and it matters. The evidence is overwhelming that why there's occasional fraud. It's not nearly as much as there are in the typical polls that I used to know, where the slogan around the Democratic Party in New York used to be, vote early and often.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I was in an election where we proved 1,100 people voted who shouldn't, including some who were dead.
Really?
Tammany Hall, the remnant of Tammany Hall on the Lower East Side had a number of people they just voted for. So, yeah, that goes. Unfortunately, some people are against voting by mail, and we have problems with mail, and that's becoming a controversy. So people are going to die because they go to the polls. Let's hope it's not too many.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's unconscionable. But that just shows you with this guy in office how desperate he is to win at any cost. But to me, it's unconscionable to be denigrating and undermining the vote by mail process in the midst of the worst pandemic in 100 years. I mean, it's really, you're asking people to put their lives at risk to go vote. And to undermine the vote by mail, which is what this president is attempting to do, is just really insidious.
Yeah. Now, some people think what you should do is replace it by voting by computer.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually happened in a few places, and sometimes it works. But the people who are experts on voting by computer don't think it's unhackable. Mm. In fact, everyone I've heard or read writing about voting by computer is sure that there will be hacks. And something that came out in the last 2 days is apparently they did discover what looks like to be Russian malware on several voting machines.
Uh-oh.
Wow. It's not clear they actually changed any votes,
mm-hmm.
but nothing is unhackable. And there have been almost no controls or decent protection on the voting machines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's not good.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I don't know what percentage of, and I don't want to put you on the spot to know what percentage of the voting machines are online and accessible to hacking. I seem to recall 4 years ago.
They send the data, they send the results. And they also have an online lookup that I assume is built into most of the machines
mm-hmm.
to see whether you voted by mail and showed up at the polls as well.
Okay.
So, yeah, they're hackable.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is that while we know that there are numerous foreign bodies that want to affect the U.S. election, just as the U.S. has infiltrated elections around the world for the last 80 years, massively in some cases, it's not clear whose side they're on. It seems...
The Russians, you mean?
The Russians and the Chinese. Mm-hmm. The rumor has come out, probably inspired by the Trump campaign, that the Chinese are supporting Joe Biden and trying to rig our election. I don't think there's any evidence about that at all, but that's what spies do. Whether it be the CIA, the KGB, or whatever the Chinese call, when they see a national interest, they will spy. Mm-hmm. That's happening now on vaccines. Did we talk about this in an earlier show?
I don't think we did. What particular aspect of the vaccine? Okay. We did talk about the fact that Russia was about to release a vaccine. I think we did mention that last week, but what aspect are you referring to now?
Russia's Sputnik vaccine is starting to get distributed. Mm-hmm. The evidence so far is that it works a little bit. We don't know whether it's a very little bit or somewhat more. And there hasn't been much evidence of any harms coming from the vaccine, mm-hmm. but we're not sure. And they just stopped the really big vaccine trial in the West because somebody got very sick, probably in England. And it may be that guy got very sick from the vaccine, although probably it wasn't, but they're being cautious. So they put that one on hold. The Chinese actually have been widely vaccinating people. It's in the hundreds of thousands, although they haven't promoted it, and they haven't talked much about it. But they're vaccinating people in dangerous border areas, the troops and things like that now. Mm-hmm. Again, no evidence it works well, no evidence there's any harm. But I had a reason to bring this up. Oh yes, spying. The New York Times, whose sources clearly were the US government security agencies, although obviously none of them say so officially, says that the Chinese and the Russians have been hacking the medical companies and anybody else working on vaccine research to try to find out what's going on. And some people seem to think that was a horrible thing.
That's routine, isn't it?
Well, obviously that there's going to be a lot of spying, anything that's security, but on this one, oh, good God, let me turn that off.
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounds like industrial espionage, Dave, to me. That's been going on for a long time.
Of that going on, but on this one, the right question to ask is not, is the spying something, but why the heck anybody is keeping science secret on vaccines against COVID?
Sure. To make money would be the answer to that, but I understand you.
I can understand why, but again, it's the kind of thing that I think of as criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And the information should be shared, should be out there, so that a researcher here at Columbia, for example, where they're doing a lot of this research, can find out what's happening in Shanghai. To my surprise, I happen to be looking at a well-known medical site that I like called stat.com. And they had a list of the treatments in process that were being studied around the world. And I hadn't known about it, but 2 of the first 6 on their list were from Chinese biotech companies who are getting to be quite good. They happen to specialize in things like vaccines and monoclonal antibodies, exactly what we need. There's no reason to think the Chinese are far ahead of us in any of this, but it's certainly possible that the first good vaccine will be one of the Chinese. And all the battles we have in the trade war, if that holds back getting access to a vaccine, or ultimately makes it harder for the Chinese to get a hold of US vaccines, if we happen to have the first ones that work well, that's against anything I believe in. Now, let me give you another thing on that, because it's come up. I'm in the middle of a lot of the debates about Huawei, Chinese boycotts, blockades, and so on.
Yeah, Huawei being the giant Chinese telecommunications firm.
Right. And so you may see my name in the Wall Street Journal. I've spent a lot of time with the Journal reporter on this and so on. These are the things I know. I follow telecom in depth. And I can tell you a lot more about that if you want. But one of the things I realized, one of the big questions, at the moment, the US is ahead in some of the tools for chip making. The most advanced happen to be the Dutch, whose ASML is what's involved in every high-end cell phone. ASML makes the only machine that can do advanced 7 nanometer and 5 nanometer chip making. A remarkable machine, costs $200 million a piece, is incredibly productive once you have it, and is the only thing that can make the advanced 5G chips. So I know it pretty well. The US is blocking China from getting their hands on that machine, even though it's Dutch. So big question on, can the Chinese catch up? Can the Chinese get around the US blockade that we're putting out there? Is, can they match some of the machines from Holland, potentially from Korea? Samsung just cut off Huawei and ZTE and so on. And the answer from most experts has been impossible. Got to take at least 5 or 10 years to catch up, no matter how much money they spend. I think, because when we're talking a $200 million machine and the technology that goes into it, and the fact that every other company in the world that makes chip making machines gave up because it was so complicated, it's going to be quite a job, and I don't know when the Chinese could catch up. But thinking about this, to do my analysis, I said, well, spies are spies. And just as the Chinese and the Americans try to find out what the other side is doing in defense, or making vaccines, or in something crucial to national security, like making the chips that don't just go into cell phones, but also go into your missiles, I'm sure the Chinese are hacking every chip-making company on Earth and probably have the complete plans in hand, because there's almost nobody who can prevent a state-level hacker who can put 100 well-trained people onto cracking in to what they want. And of course, we know the Chinese did successfully crack the NSA and got all the NSA hacking tools, and they put them out via WikiLeaks and things like that, and created chaos in the internet. So if the NSA can't protect themselves against the Russians, I don't know if ASML or Intel can. And I would lay odds that the Chinese have that leg up. The other thing I've learned is that it would take a miracle for China to quickly catch up. They're 2 generations behind right now. But I've seen a lot of miracles coming out of China in technology. For better or worse, they've done incredible things. 400 million people connected with fiber to the home. The US may have 5 million 5G phones out there. China passed 100 million in the last few weeks.
Wow.
The US, nobody gives us numbers, that's why I say the US may. The US may have tens of thousands of cell sites upgraded. The Chinese have upgraded 480,000, even though they started after we did.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't excuse all the things we know are going on in China. The crackdown in Hong Kong is frightening and horrifying, friends of mine, and the facts are very clear. But China's in the world. China does some things right and some things wrong, but we can't ignore it. It's a quarter or a third of the internet, for example, and it could come up with a vaccine before we do, and it is ahead of us in 5G. And the conclusion I draw is that whatever we may think about their government and censorship, we have to work with them. Now, they may think they shouldn't work with the Americans who are sending drones around the world, killing whoever we feel like killing. Sometimes innocent wedding parties. Sometimes people who really were trying to bomb and destroy us. Chinese don't have anybody out there in a war outside of China. And Stu, how many wars are we currently actively involved in?
That's a good question, Dave. I really don't know, but before I'm sure you have the answer. Let me just say, folks out there, you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. This is Community and Technology with Stu and Dave, and we're talking about tech on the international level, tech espionage, and in particular China, and the fact that they aren't involved in any conflicts outside of their country. That's interesting. How many are we involved in? Do you have a count on that?
Well, you can start with Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, all of which we have thousands of troops in. We have our troops getting occasionally wounded and even killed in places like Somalia as well, Yemen. So when we say the Chinese are cracking down in Hong Kong, although they're not killing anybody, but there sure is a rough crackdown. Mm-hmm. And they're cracking down on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang that are fighting for independence. Although again, they're not in the habit of killing people, but they may have 1 million people in re-education camps. They're not starving them in those camps, but we who are bombing the world may not be the ones to criticize anybody else. And we were talking about what's happening in our elections. What came up in Georgia is that 200,000 vote people were probably wrongly stricken from the voting rolls, and we would have had a different government in Georgia right now, or North Carolina. I think this is Georgia, just came up in the last week. I start wondering, can we even call the US a democracy when it costs $1 billion to run for president? Barack Obama, somebody I respect, could not have been elected president if he didn't manage to raise $1 billion. That takes a lot of compromises.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton made a lot of compromises. Do we still have a democracy when that's true? These are horrifying thoughts, and they're not technology. We're technology experts, not political experts. What are the other technology stories this week?
Well, you know, sticking with the election theme, you do see technology rearing its head again. Facebook just came out and made a rule that they will not accept political advertising the final week of the election. I'm not sure what the rationale is there. Somehow they think that there may be some last minute shenanigans that they want to block. To me, what about all the shenanigans that are happening between now and then? And what are they doing? And, you know, from some of the reporting, I'm seeing not so good a job. I'm looking at what's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and just how there was so much chatter and plotting by right-wing militia on Facebook. Let's go get these guys. There's going to be some killing tonight. I'm going to go get these looters. Some really crazy conspiratorial talk by right-wing militia that actually came to fruition on Facebook. And Facebook didn't react. Some of the stuff was taken down a day or two later. Facebook tried to take credit for that, but they didn't take it down. One of the militia groups, one of the monitoring groups rather, took it down. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on in social media that is fomenting a lot of the violence and the conflict and the division. And, you know, I think this current president is really hoping to really ignite all of these divisions as best he can to help divide folks in the hopes that that is going to help his election prospects. You know, I'm hoping that folks are going to resist that. But, you know, the social media is so powerful and so far-reaching. You know, I'm concerned. And, you know, I think you may have seen that the Department of Homeland Security just came out this week with a draft memorandum. We don't know whether it's going to be officially promulgated or not. A draft memorandum stating that the white supremacists are the biggest domestic threat here in the U.S., white supremacists. So these are the folks that are like active on social media, organizing and fomenting not just unrest, but actual shootings and killings. Much of it, I think, in an effort to ignite the flames and to really make real some of Trump's statements that I think are mostly bogus, that, you know, oh, there's a civil war going on and there's a race war going on. He would like to really see that happen. And he's got a lot of enablers in the right-wing militia that are using social media, Facebook and Twitter and others to help foment and push that agenda. So, you know, I'm concerned that the social media platforms are not nearly vigilant enough in monitoring the hate speech and monitoring all of this violence fomenting that's going on in this current election cycle. What's your take on that, Dave?
Well, social media does a lot of good things. The internet does a lot of good things. But there are also some very heavy prices being paid, and the division in our society is definitely being exacerbated by the echo chamber of social media. When we talking about social media in places like Myanmar, it clearly was heavily involved in a genocide-style massacre, according to New York Times reporting. These are not easy problems to solve. There is no way anybody has come up with technology that solves them. And Facebook may have 35,000 people monitoring things, but so much gets through, it's clear that that's not enough. Did you see what was happening, the problem monitoring TikTok this week?
No, I didn't. What happened with that?
On Sunday, somebody committed suicide on Facebook. That got copied to TikTok. TikTok took it down. Dozens of other people put it up. TikTok kept trying to pull them down. By Tuesday, there were so many people posting it that it wasn't clear TikTok could stop the pictures of somebody committing suicide that they wanted to pull away. These are really hard questions. I get into debates about what's the right thing to do and what's freedom of speech and what's permissionless innovation and so on. Wish I had simple answers, but anybody who says only that the internet or that anybody who says that the internet only has a positive impact is fooling themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
And somebody very prominent in the internet said that this week.
Wow, you got blinders on if you think that.
Yeah.
Well, we're winding down here, Dave. Folks, you've been listening to Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We've talked about a lot of stuff from the school reopening in the midst of the pandemic to pandemic health and safety precautions that WHCR 90.3 FM is helping to put out, to stuff that's going on with the election interference and in particular the Chinese and the Russians, as well as that guy in the White House. Any final comments, Dave, before we sign off?
Well, you can learn a lot on the internet.
Yeah.
And I'm glad of that.
Absolutely. And certainly on Community and Technology. Tune in, as one of my buddies likes to say when he closes his show out, you just might learn something. So Community and Technology, 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock every Wednesday, 90.3 FM. Also on WHCR.org and safeandsmart.org. Next week, we're going to have Polly Spain and Diana Blackwell and folks talking about universal basic income. So stay tuned and stay alert, stay safe. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.
Out on my way